Hey there, budgeteers. Are you ready to unlock the power of each payday and take control of your finances like a boss? Introducing the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits. This isn't your average budgeting tool. Oh no. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll harness the unique rhythm of your paychecks to supercharge your financial game. Say goodbye to the confusion of monthly budgets and hello to the clarity of every payday. You'll know exactly when money is coming in and when it's going out, giving you the edge you need to stay on top of your finances. But that's not all. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll easily spot whether you're rocking a surplus or facing a deficit. Armed with this knowledge, you'll make informed decisions that set you up for financial success. It's time to transform your relationship with money and create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Get your hands on the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and start making every dollar count. Don't let financial stress hold you back. Create a better plan for your money and seize the power of your pay period and thrive with the Payday Power Planner. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now to grab your free copy and unleash your financial potential. What's up, budgeteers, and welcome to the New Money Habits podcast. I'm your host and one of the co-founders of New Money Habits, Coach Nino Villa. Today, I sit down with my partner and fellow co-founder, Maria Casillas, to explore the importance of having someone in your life who cares enough to provide honest reflection. If you have any questions, be sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on your favorite podcast platform, or tell your smart speaker to play the latest episode of the New Money Habits podcast. If you want to help out the show, consider leaving a 5-star rating and review. We cannot thank you enough for leaving those 5-star ratings and reviews. They truly help us to spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money. Now let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome back, Maria. And again, just incredibly excited at the idea of having you on more regularly so that our listeners who become our clients, who get to experience you in real time, also get to know you ahead of time. So Thanks for being back on.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you.
Today, I want to jump into a conversation you and I have had behind the scenes, but I wanted to bring it to the forefront for our listeners. And that conversation is about, it centers around this idea of what people think they want versus what people actually want. Mm-hmm. And one of those things that we've talked about is that people think that they want like this judgment-free zone, and they want to be free of judgment even from themselves. But the truth is that many are looking for someone who cares enough to tell them the truth. And so I wanted to kind of explore that today. I wanted to explore, what does it even mean to find somebody who cares enough to tell you the truth? What does that look like? And how do we go about finding that person? So,
all right. Well, I think it sounds like a really great conversation. Before we just dive right into that, though, I want to say that I know that oftentimes we think in terms of binary, that they're either going to be judgment free or there's going to be somebody who can, tell me the truth. And I just want to let you know that there is room for both at the same time. I think that when we have had this conversation in the past about what people think they want and what they really want, the whole idea of having a judgment-free zone, we can be judge-free and still tell the truth at the same time. And so I just want people to know that if we're looking for somebody who's going to tell us the truth, it doesn't mean that they're going to be sitting there thinking all of the horrible things about you, and they're going to be putting you in this, prejudged area. That's not how this works. So just want to preface it with that, so that we're realizing that these two things can happen at once. Okay. So you had asked, like, what does that even look like? Well, yeah. I like to talk about reflection. And when you hear the word reflection, a lot of times we can be thinking about, well, does that just mean that you are reflecting on something in the past? And I'm going to say, no, we're actually talking about like what a mirror does for somebody. So as coaches, we really try to be a mirror for somebody so that when we're acting in a certain way, or we're modeling a certain thing, what we're actually showing you is how you are showing up in front of us, or how we're perceiving what you're doing. I heard actually in church the other day, a really great example. We were talking about how, if we are to be like God, then what that really means is that when people look in a rearview mirror, for example, and they are looking at the mirror but they see a car behind them, are they looking at a mirror or are they looking at a car? And we can say with pretty strong confidence they're actually looking at the mirror, but what they're seeing is the car. And that's because of that reflection that is happening. And so in a coaching relationship, we like to see the same thing where we are just acting as a mirror for you, so that when you look at that mirror, you're actually seeing yourself in that. So that's just as we're looking at the word reflection, I just want to make sure that we show that. First, before we go on, what comes up for you when we talk about that?
Being a mirror,
Yeah, yeah.
I, I, I'm familiar enough with the analogy where it's like I hold up the mirror, so I'm not necessarily the mirror. I'm just the one holding it up, right? But
Okay,
but the analogy still comes to the same conclusion, which is
sure.
I'm holding up that mirror so that you can see yourself
Yeah.
and either the habits that you have with money or the goals that you've set, and it's just holding up that mirror. And again, to your earlier point about this not being binary, it's not that I'm holding up the mirror and then casting judgment. I'm simply holding up the mirror
Right.
so that you can see your reflection, see what's going on. And then we talk about it in a judgment free zone of, okay, this is what it is. What would we like to change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really great. And I think what you are showing is that there's actually two different ways we can use that mirror analogy. And sometimes it is exactly what you said, where it's just holding that mirror up. But
Mhm.
sometimes it actually is like a technique that coaches use. Just so anyone who's listening, like, oh, I might have heard somebody do that, or maybe if you work with
Mm.
a coach, you see that. But actually mirroring somebody's just like their demeanor and the way that they're seated, seated isn't a word, but the way that they are being in front of you, sometimes that's all they need to recognize like that's what they're actually doing. So it's almost more like a physical mirror. So we
Mm.
can use it in both ways. I just wanted to throw that out there. But
Yeah.
yes, you're correct. Most of the time it's oftentimes just, holding that mirror up. So um when we talk about like what does it mean to have that, we're going to have to talk about what does somebody even like that look like?
Yes. But before we even talk about what they look like, I want to help our listeners understand like what's the difference between finding this person, somebody who's going to hold up that mirror, and just like an accountability partner, because
Oh,
that's a term I think more people are familiar with, and like, oh, is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about just getting an accountability partner? It's like kind of sort of but not the same.
great question. That's a really great question. I think in order to do that, we kind of have to define what an accountability partner would be.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that we have different ideas of what this would be. And maybe we don't. For me, I think oftentimes the accountability partner is I'm going to tell the accountability partner what it is that I'm working towards, what I'm going to do in order to make that happen, how often I'm going to do that, and then I give them permission to quote unquote hold me accountable. So I tell
Hmm.
them how that's going to be. You can call me every day, you can text me, here's what I'm going to do, if you don't hear from me, here's what you can do for me, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that's any different than what you would define an accountability partner as. If it is, say
Very
so.
similar, right?
Okay.
It is like I'm kind of just communicating what's going on, and I want you to check in with me to hold me accountable to the things that I said.
Yeah. Okay. So the common theme there, I think, is that we are telling them what we're going to do. So we're in charge. We're the ones who are driving the boat, and that's not going to be super different when it comes to this other thing. But we're the ones who decided what it was. We didn't
Mhm.
ask for anybody's opinion. We didn't ask for for any feedback. And perhaps that's because we didn't want it. Or maybe we kind of went through that process before, but now we're just finding an accountability partner to hold us accountable. Either
Mhm.
way, Nino, those are two separate people.
Yep. I think back to I had an accountability partner in maybe more like a gym going partner, but we lived in the same house. I saw the light on in at 5:30 in the morning, and I was like, okay, that means I'm getting up and I'm going. But he wasn't speaking into like my workout routine or like the things that I was doing. It was just, hey, at 5:30 in the morning, we're both up, we're getting in the car, we're going to the
Yeah.
gym.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think for that reason, if somebody just wants an accountability partner, they can go get that. If somebody's looking for more of that reflection that we're talking about and they
mhm,
recognize, oh, I really want to find somebody who I can work with on that, I still think they might need an accountability partner as well. Oftentimes,
mhm.
those are not the same, like one and the same, because, and we can get into that when we talk about maybe some of the other stuff, but just kind of keep that in mind. Oftentimes, it's not the same person.
All right. So you were kind of bringing up the point of like, what does that person even look like?
Well, first of all, they have to be honest. They have to be somebody you can trust. So if it's somebody that you're watching from afar and they're doing things that really are not aligned with like who you are and what your values are, probably don't go there, because it's maybe somebody that is not able to be neutral for you. So that's, which is actually a good a good move into the next thing. You want somebody who's neutral.
Hey there, budgeteers. You know, good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So, what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and He cannot be in the presence of sin. So, this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
You want somebody who's neutral, somebody who can be like that third eye looking at you, someone who doesn't have an agenda with what it is that you're supposed to be doing. They can truly just listen to where you are and just kind of go there with you. I heard the other day, because I believe very strongly in meeting someone where they are. But then I heard someone the other day say, hey, that's ridiculous. You don't want to meet someone where they are because that's just enabling everything that they're doing. And I understand what that person was saying. They were
Mhm.
saying, if you meet someone where they are and then keep them
Stay
going in
there.
that direction and keep them staying there, then yes, that's absolutely enabling. But that's not what I mean when we say meet someone where they are. You need somebody who can just kind of be where you are so that they know how to talk to you about where you want to be going.
Mhm.
I think you're also going to want somebody who is able to listen without feeling the need to respond. They need to listen so that they can understand what you're saying. You can watch people, because some of these people might be in your circle, right? And you can watch what people do. You can see how they are with other people. And if there's somebody who is making eye contact with the person they're talking to and they're nodding and they're hearing, they're not interrupting, they're actually letting the person finish and then sometimes follow up with a question, chances are that person is actually listening to understand and they're questioning to understand more. They're not just listening to say, "Oh, here's my opinion on that particular thing."
Right. I was counseling somebody, coaching somebody just the other day, and actually, I'm fighting between two different memories, two different events that have happened in the last couple of days, where one was with a couple where it's that very thing, like listening to understand, asking questions to clarify, to
Hmm.
ensure that I understand
Hmm.
before offering any sort of advice or, hey, maybe you want to think about this or that. In the other case, it was listening as somebody was sharing specifically a trigger, trying to understand that trigger more so that I could meet that person where they are to help them move forward from that place into a place that's more productive and effective. Um, and so, yeah, just some recency bias.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm glad that you have that. I think one other thing that I want to mention is patience because this is something that oftentimes can take a little while. Sometimes the insight doesn't take a really long time, but the change might. And so it depends on what you're looking for, Nino. If our listeners are looking for somebody who just needs to help them recognize where their stuck point is, then it might be just a 30 to 60-minute conversation that they need to have, and then they go and find an accountability partner on top of that. That's what I was
Mm,
talking about earlier. But if it's somebody who needs to not only find the insights, but is struggling to make long lasting change and they want to be able to have that, check in on a regular basis, they might need somebody who's willing to kind of stick it out a little bit longer. In which case, not only do you need somebody who has patience, but somebody who has the time to offer that. Now I
mm,
sit here across from you, and both of us, we have kids, and when you mentioned the recency bias, part of the reason that's so hard sometimes for listeners to do is because we wear several hats throughout the day. Sometimes we're a parent, and sometimes we're a sibling, and sometimes we're the son or daughter, and sometimes we're the pastor, and sometimes it doesn't matter. There's a bunch, you could fill in the blanks there. But because of those things, like, you wanted to be able to give advice right away. As a father, that's one of the things that we like to try to do as a parent, is to impart advice onto our children. So we have to be able to be, again, impartial and recognize what hat are we wearing at the right time so that the person who we're talking to is well served. So those who are listening, when you're looking for somebody like that, make sure that they have the ability to not just have that patience, but to take that hat off as necessary and put it on the right one.
mm. Compartmentalize,
Yeah.
kind of who you are and how they're helping out. And so we can continue to talk about like the qualities if need be, but like, where do I find this magical person and how do I know that they're the right fit?
Well, I mean, I did mention a couple of minutes ago that sometimes they're in our circle. Um, I mean, so we talked about a lot of hats, right? If you're seeing somebody and you're watching them in relationship with somebody else, that person, the way that they are, very well might be that person that you could go and talk to about something like that. I remember growing up where, I mean, I would just be a friend to somebody, but inevitably, literally from this time I was 12 years old, people would come up to me and ask for advice. I have aunts and uncles who contact me. It's just so weird because they're supposed to be the ones who are the
Hmm.
authority, and so it's been very interesting for me because people have seen that in me and were drawn to that. Not everybody has that gift, and that's okay. So maybe your person's not in your circle. I don't know, but that's one place that you can look. Just remember, if you are going to go to somebody who's in your immediate circle, whether it's family member, friend, especially if it's one of those closer relationships, please, please, please remember that it's hard to change the hat. So if that person is not a trained individual and you're just going to them for, some advice, they're going to give you that advice. If you're going to them for an insight, chances are they're not going to give you an insight. They're just going to give you advice because they don't understand the whole reflection issue and how that
Hmm.
works, and what kinds of questions need to be asked to draw it out of you. I'm a firm believer that nobody knows you more than you know you. And so, I mean, with the exception of the person who made you. But other than that, no one else knows you better. And so to go to anybody, to any professional, ourselves included, and think that we're going to give you an answer that you don't already have inside of you, I think is probably not true. Now, are there things that we might know? Do people know things that you don't know? Absolutely. That's, it's wisdom. Um,
Hmm.
but in order to help draw out of you the things that are going to stick with you, you want to have somebody who knows what they're doing for that. So, um, where are some other places you can find people? I would say there are obviously professionals. So there are, depending on what your needs are, we've talked about, I think, on the show, maybe not. If not, let me know. But I know we've talked about the difference between coaching and counseling, for example.
Hmm.
So if there is somebody that is listening and they're like, I have some mental health stuff that it's really messing with my life right now. I need help with that. You're probably looking for somebody who has all of these things that we just talked about, all of those traits, but they might be somebody who's a little bit more professionally developed to help people with mental health issues.
Hmm.
However, if you're just looking to get unstuck with your money and you're like, I don't have mental health issues that go along with it. There's probably some emotional stuff tied up with it because, you're human. That makes sense. Then somebody like us would be a good place for that as well. I know there are probably many other places. What do you think, Nino?
Well, I think you're going to start of one of two places. You're going to start with your inner circle, or you know that you don't have somebody in your inner circle that you know you can really open up in that way.
Okay.
But let's stay in the inner circle for a moment. Like you said, I just want to kind of reiterate that finding somebody who you can truly be vulnerable with, who is going to reserve judgment and really listen to understand instead of listen to espouse opinions, and somebody who is going to be honest and truthful in a kind and loving and gentle way, right? I'm going through this season right now about how everything is about truth in love.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Apostle Paul who told us that if I can speak all the languages and I have all of the knowledge, but I don't have love, I'm just a noisy gong, right? So I can tell you something that's true, but if I'm a jerk about it, it's not going to land. I can tell
Right.
you that same truth. And as long as I do it with patience and kindness and gentleness and humility and mercy and grace and all of those good things, well, then you're going to respond to it. So your inner circle and if somebody like that exists. And so I always like to just kind of share personal experience. But a number of years ago, I needed some mentoring in my life. And I have an older brother whose walk with Christ is incredible. And so I knew he was somebody that I could open up to about life, marriage, work, all of that stuff. And he's a half brother, so there's an age gap there, and we didn't grow up in the same household, so there's a relationship that I just knew that was a safe person to explore those things with.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have that type of person in your inner circle. If you don't, and most people don't, in my experience anyway, most people do not have somebody in their inner circle that they can get that vulnerable and that intimate with. And so you have to look outside of your immediate circle, which sounds weird. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it doesn't sound. I'm going to just start talking to a stranger. But to your point, when we have certain issues and we go and seek therapy or counseling from a professional, we open up to a stranger about things that we're not normally opening up to other people about. And somehow it's easier.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that, and I did not do a very good job articulating it earlier, so I'm really glad you brought that up, is that when we go to somebody, even if they're really good with all those traits, if we are not confident that that won't then become the topic of conversation with the next person in the family line, then it doesn't feel as safe to us. And it's not like, we're having to worry about our physical safety. But if we don't want our business to be all over the family bulletin board, then maybe we're just really careful about who we say some of that stuff to. So that is something I think that you bring up, which is really, really good. And the idea of talking to a stranger sounds, like you said, a little like unintuitive, but it's not, because we don't know, like that person might go and talk to their mom about the client that they just had and make spill your story, but they don't know you. They don't know, and they're not supposed to spill your story, by the way. There are confidentiality rules and all that, which they should be doing. But let's say for a second that they don't. Let's say that they actually do go and share some of this information with somebody. You don't know them. They don't know you. It's not going to affect you. And so that, I think, is probably why at a subconscious level, we realize that it doesn't really matter. And this might be another just subconscious thing, but what about when you go and you spill your beans to somebody who's a complete stranger to you, and then you get really uncomfortable with that? I'm not suggesting you all should do this. How easy is it to walk away?
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to walk away from your brother.
Right.
Right? I mean, he knows it now. You're vulnerable. It's there. And now you're like, oh, this is uncomfortable, but I got to deal with it. I think that we oftentimes will say, well, I'm going to go spill my beans to the stranger, because if it gets super vulnerable and uncomfortable, I know I have an out for that. So I think that's probably partly why it seems counterintuitive, but it's not.
Yeah. And I think, interestingly enough, I think it's intuitively we know that it's actually easier. It just sounds more difficult.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, now I got to get somebody up to speed on all the things that's going on. But here's the interesting thing. Sitting down with a client recently who was kind of just sharing the backstory, but only the parts that were relevant in the moment. Right? Not all of the backstory, right? So then we can kind of target in on what is specifically going on, what is the trigger that triggered this event, what is the behavior that subsequently comes from that trigger. And we had a fantastic conversation. We spent 45 minutes speaking more about how this person leans into their faith when these triggering moments come up than we did about the actual plan for their money for the next couple of weeks for the pay period. And by the end of it, they expressed, like, I got more out of the 45 minutes that we talked about how to lean into my faith than the final 15 minutes of mapping out the numbers for the next 2 weeks.
Which is what they thought they came to you for.
Yeah, exactly. But that behavior with money that was triggered, we had to kind of pull back the onion a little bit and kind of figure out, okay, why is that a trigger? What happens? What's the emotional response? Then what's the physical response? Where is your headspace?
And when you pull back that onion, those layers, layer by layer, it becomes increasingly vulnerable with each layer pull. And I think that whoever this was that you were talking to had to have felt comfortable with you being able to do that. You had to have patience in order to stick with him or her to pull back each one of those layers and get to the heart of what was really going on. But you also had to have the ability to ask the right questions, and they had to have the willingness to share answers of those questions. And so there really is a play back and forth between people. You started the conversation by asking what it looks like, but then how do we find that person? And I think that this is probably a really good spot to just interject that it's not just how do you find the right person. You also need to be the right person for the job. Like, you need to be in a space that you're willing to hear those things.
Hey there, budgeteers. Are you tired of feeling like your finances are running the show? Well, it's time to flip the script and take charge of your money with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is about empowering you with the knowledge and tools you need to make savvy money moves and build a solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kickstart your journey to financial freedom. Yep, you heard me right. Free. In this session, one of our experienced coaches will help you to pinpoint your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We're talking about mastering your money mindset, picking up practical money management skills, and having someone to hold you accountable along the way. So, if you're ready to kiss financial stress goodbye and say hello to a brighter financial future, then schedule your free session today to create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom.
You need to be in a space that you're willing to hear those things. So, we talked in the beginning about people who are looking for a judge-free zone. And I even started around how to explain how, like, yes, both of those things can be there in the same time. And I think the reason that I struggle with that is because I know in my heart of hearts that people say that and they think that they're asking for that. But oftentimes the ones who just throw that out there are the ones who aren't ready to change. They're the ones who aren't ready to hear the truth that is right there in front of them, and they're just like, I can't see that right now, because if I see that, it means I need to do differently, and I'm not in the space ready to do differently. And so yeah, I know we hadn't really talked ahead of time about bringing that up, but it just came to mind, and I think it's probably one of the reasons that it was so difficult to distinguish between judge-free versus somebody who's willing to tell you the truth. It's
Yeah.
all about who you are.
No, I think it's an important point about, like, how do I, if I'm the one searching for this individual, how do I make that relationship effective? How do I make the experience effective? And with this client, it was asking permission to be honest and to go in a direction of take the conversation in a direction that they weren't necessarily prepared to go, but asking permission, and them making themselves open and responsive to, yeah, like, let's go there. And so giving permission. So I think just as much as you're looking for these particular qualities in the person that you want to sit down with, I think we should also talk a little bit about what qualities should you have to make this experience actually effective.
All right. Well, shame on me for thinking you wouldn't go there. No, I totally knew you would go there. I don't have a list of qualities available, so I'm shooting from the hip here. But I would say willingness to engage in conversation. Obviously, being open-minded is going to be something that's important. The ability to ask questions back. If you don't understand what your coach or your inner circle friend is trying to say to you, ask back. Like, I didn't understand that question. Don't just, come up with some line because you think that you know what they want to hear. I think that you also need to, in addition to being open-minded, you need to be willing to try new things. If something doesn't seem like it's going to serve you, it's okay to let somebody know, I'm not sure that that's going to serve me. But if it's not something that goes against your moral code, even if you think it won't serve you, give it a try. It doesn't hurt to try new things. You might just find that the person who you're talking to has a creative mind and knows what to just shake it up a little bit for you. And you might find, oh my gosh, I actually really, really appreciate that. I'll give you a quick example from somebody that I had coached the other day. I like when people talk about homework, I like to not give a lot of homework, but I like to ask them what is something they would like to be working on. And so, without giving you all of the boring background details, I'll just say that when we got to this point in the conversation, this young lady had told me that one of the things that she wanted to work on was not having her phone next to her all the time, because like she was having trouble sleeping and she would like pick up the phone and look at it. And then I asked her what one of her solutions would be. And she said, well, I've got this prayer corner that I use. And she's like, oh, Maria, you've got it. Like, it is filled with books and it's filled with beauty and it's filled with all this stuff, but I haven't touched it in how many months? And she said, and it's a real mess. So all I would need to do is go in there, and, for a few minutes. And that's what I want to do. So she skipped right over the spot about it being a real mess and, all that. So when we were kind of going through, okay, I like the ideas that you're sharing. I think that the idea of you going in and spending time in prayer, like you said, for 15 minutes is a great idea. I don't want you to go into the prayer corner. And she's like, what? Why would I not go into the prayer corner? So because it's a mess and you're not going to clean it up. And if you want to clean it up ahead of time, it's going to stop you from starting. So I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to put your phone in the prayer corner when you go to bed. And I want you to bring one of those books that you were talking about and put that on your bedside instead of your phone. And so when you wake up in the middle of the night, that's what you can pick up and look at rather than your phone. And she was just like, oh, well, that's great. Like, I love that idea. And what we were doing with that, and is we were solving two things at one time, right? Like, we're taking the phone away from her and giving her the other stuff. But I didn't tell her not to use the prayer corner ever. I didn't want that thing to be the barrier that kept her from starting, right?
Yeah.
So what I suggested to her was completely unconventional. It was not out of alignment with what she wanted to do, but it was just a small tweak from what she had in her mind. And so she was open-minded and willing to try that. And so that's, I think, what I mean when I say, if it's something you wouldn't necessarily have thought of yourself, but it's not against your moral code, just be open to try new things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always appreciate a solid example for our listeners to just kind of hear, like, how does that kind of play out? But
Yeah.
one that's very common that I also just wanted to share is, so one of my kind of go-tos is, let's pick a couple of categories and make them cash categories. Let's truly switch up the behavior in those particular categories and let's manage them with cash. And because of the culture that we live in and the convenience of everything that we have today, this is usually it at least raises an eyebrow.
Yep.
Like, what? If not, gets a much stronger reaction like, no, I'm not interested in doing that.
Right.
And everything in between. But it is one that time and time and time again, our clients come back and they're like, thank you for that idea. It has totally changed the way that I eat out or that I spend on clothes or whatever the category is that they're managing. They notice it. It is a tangible shift in their thinking, in their execution, in their overall behavior.
Yeah, I mean, because it involves more than just their mind. It involves their hands as well. And that sounds so silly, but we've known as raising children that you have to involve different areas of their body in order to actually have something stick. And so that makes perfect sense. I do want to point something out to you, not to you, to our listeners, about what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that you have them choose a or two or three categories, not the entire thing. And I think that that's where a lot of that pushback comes from. Like, no, thank you, I'm not interested, because we've been told, well, you should only spend cash on, X, Y, and Z. And instead of just telling people that, what you're doing is you're finding out, what do you struggle with the most? Like, what's one category that you want to change, so we can just start somewhere and see if it works. Because if it didn't work for them, then shifting them to a full cash approach is probably not going to be a good idea.
Right.
So you're testing it, they're being willing to try it, and what they're finding is, oh, this is really great. And that doesn't necessarily mean they need to shift to all cash. It just means that it gave them the feedback and the data that they needed for that particular category. So anybody's listening today, don't be like, oh my gosh, like if we go there, they're going to make us do cash. No, it's just a matter of, this is an exercise. It's one of many options that we have in our tool belt in order to get you thinking and doing things differently with money. And sometimes it's the only shift that you need. And sometimes it's just one of many that will, continue on in your plan. So
Yeah.
I love that you're just doing a little bit at a time.
Yeah. One of my favorite testimonies is that I'm working with a young 25-year-old who loves the cash system.
Yeah.
Loves it. She wouldn't have it any other way.
And she does all cash?
No, there are things that she uses her checking account for and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But she's got her core categories that it's like, these are the ones I manage with cash, and she absolutely loves it.
Yeah, that's great. It is great. And somebody like that was brought up with probably no cash at all if she's 25 years old.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's why I love that testimony, is because even the younger generation, when they're thinking about their money differently and when they're behaving with their money differently, and they implement things that seem unconventional to them because that's not their conventional wisdom of today, they see they see the fruit of that. So it's awesome.
Yeah. I do have a feeling we're going to have to shift some of the way that we do things as it gets more and more difficult to utilize cash. And so that's a topic for a whole nother day. But it is interesting to see how that will shift the way that they behave with money. One example, and it's actually a really good example, is that if you go somewhere, I mean, your person is like, I'm going to only use cash to eat out, for example, and they start going somewhere and they're like, we don't take cash. They get to decide, do I shift away from what I'm doing, or do I let them know that they just lost a customer because they aren't willing to take this cash? Now, if it gets to the point where there's a cashless society, which I am praying does not happen, but if it gets to that point, then we might have no real choices. But for those people who are using cash, you still have a choice in what your money is doing and who you're giving it to and what it says when you're behaving with it. So
yeah. So circling back, just to kind of wrap things up, I mean, we got off on a really awesome tangent about how to implement cash, but it really stems from being open to new ideas.
Yeah.
So as you're hearing new ideas and you're thinking about how might I make a change in the way that I'm managing a portion of my finances, or maybe a more significant portion of your finances, thinking to yourself, okay, it's not really what I want to do. But again, if it doesn't go against your moral code, why not give it a shot, see how it works for you? And if it's something that serves you well, awesome. And if it doesn't, we adjust.
Yeah. Amen.
No hard and fast here, especially amongst us. Well, any closing thoughts to our listeners who have been hanging out with us thinking about, okay, so getting somebody work in my life to help me achieve my financial goals, who can be a reflection to me more than just an accountability partner. Any kind of final thoughts you would share with them?
Well, I would encourage them to reach out to us, because I think that one of the things that we're able to do is recognize, again, where they are and see where it is that they'd like to go. And we'd probably have some really, like we said, unconventional things that maybe they're not used to seeing or hearing, and just a new approach to some of this personal finance stuff. So I would highly encourage that. And if we're not a good fit, we'll let you know that, we promise. But we want to see if we're a good fit and we might be able to serve you. I also think that, if you're looking at someone from your inner circle, go ahead and look for that person, maybe get some ideas. But I would say, like we mentioned earlier, Nino, even if you work with us or any other professional, I think it's a good idea to have an accountability partner on top of that. And so if it were me, I would probably look for a professional who's more of that neutral and, like we said, stranger, if you will, not related to me, to have work with me for figuring out what my plan is, what some of those insights are, some of the onion peeling back process, because it's just more, I don't know, like we said earlier, it's just easier when it's a stranger. And then I would probably look for that person that I trust in my inner circle to be the accountability partner, because chances are I want to be able to talk to that person more often anyway. As much as I love my clients, I don't think any one of them wants to contact me daily to go to the gym with them. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm thinking that would be more of that relationship that you want to build with somebody. Build the relationship with somebody that is close to you or you want to become closer to. Use that as the accountability. And especially if they're wanting to make some of those changes as well. Otherwise, it becomes very one-sided and it feels awkward for them. So, yeah.
Great advice, as per the usual. So thank you again for hanging out with us and exploring what it means to find somebody who cares enough to tell you the truth.
You bet. Thank you.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.